Today, we are going to talk about the Federal Risk Management Framework, which has recently been updated from version 1.0 to 2.0. I'm Ashley Nye with Phoenix TS, and I am super excited to have Leighton Johnson, one of our subject matter experts, join us today on the blog. Leighton, how are you?
I am doing great.
Good, good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. A little bit of background, Leighton has been teaching RMF for Phoenix TS for over 5 years now. He's taught for a lot of our great customers like DISA and CIOG6. And most recently, he has been the primary contributor to the new RMF text distributed by 30 Bird Media, which is in the 2.0 implementation. Leighton, would you care to share some more experience that you have with the risk management framework?
My organization and I have conducted over 30 assessments of the risk management framework since it originally came out in 2010. And since 2014, when DoD adopted RMF, I've also been assisting various components, Army, Navy, Air Force, DISA, as well as multiple combatant commands with their implementations for RMF as well. And I'm really excited that we got the new version out, which NIST produced in December this past year. So I'm looking forward to working with that.
Oh, very exciting. That was a very quick turnaround time too. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Can you share with us?
I had a little bit of advance notice. I know some of the people over at NIST, and so I knew where they were headed with it.
Oh, perfect.
We have been, as one of the contributors to the updates to it from last year, I knew that they were doing some of these efforts anyway.
Great, very awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. Would you care to do a 30-second just overview of what the new RMF is, especially in
Okay, sure. RMF 2.0 does a couple of major things in reference to what was there before with the 6-step standardized process. They've added the preparation phase, which of course was what everybody was doing anyway, but now it's formalized. They look at it in preparation with both from an organizational level, getting everything set, assigning the AO, those types of things, as well as what each organizational level has to do in order to conduct a RMF activity for their new systems as they begin to walk through them. They've also included privacy as one of the primary concerns that has been always there, but was as an appendix in the past to all the different efforts. Now it's totally inculcated into everything with the RMF. The second big area that they cover now, of course, as we see out in the cyber world, this whole supply chain risk arena. And so they've built a whole new area around supply chain risk management as part of those efforts, supported by their special publication, SP 800-161, that they produced about 18 months ago as part of those efforts. The third big thing that they did was following the lead of what our executive orders have been over the last couple of years, building in the cybersecurity framework as part of the mechanism that is to be utilized as well. And the fourth primary thing that they did was when NIST updated the whole security engineering arena around SP 800-160, volumes 1 and 2 and other parts over the last 3 or 4 years, that modernized the view of what security engineering was. So they've included that in great detail within 837 Rev 2 as part of their efforts. In fact, every single step has a tie-in, every single task has a tie-in to something within the security engineering updated arena.
So it sounds like they were taking the process as people were already using it and just formalizing it more and putting in all those.
They did with the preparation, yes. They did with that first part. The other 3 big advances, you know, many people, many organizations were utilizing privacy, but as a separate entity, as a separate viewpoint. And NIST's viewpoint has always been privacy and security go together. And I mean, for the most part, privacy is a confidentiality view that you have to work with as a uniqueness when you're dealing with personal information, especially. And so they wanted to ensure that that was part of the standard view for every RMF package is, do you have personal information in there? If so, these are the extra areas that you have to pay attention to when you're dealing with that type of information.
Okay, understood. So it seems like there's some significant changes there.
Oh, there are. I mean, it's got a big 4 areas that they've changed, plus, of course, adding the new step. I mean, they left the initial steps 1 through 6 alone. They went with preparation and they call it step 0. But that's the point of it is, and there's a whole series of tasks. They reordered a few of them out of what was in step 1 and 2 before into this step 0 as part of those efforts, like registration of the system with the federal mechanisms and those types of things. But for the most part, they pretty formalized what everybody was having to go through, but every organization was having to do it on their own with no guidance.
Okay.
And so what they've done now is created a whole set of guidance at both the organizational level and then down at the system level.
Okay. So how are these changes going to affect people that are already using RMF, that have already been
steps 1 through 6 are the same. So, you know, they basically maybe added a few little pieces here and there across the board, but for the most part, steps 1 through 6 are pretty already formalized in what they can do and what they need as far as what are the efforts necessary for the organization. What they've done, though, is added these other arenas that we have seen historically, especially in the cyber world over the last couple of years, cause issues and cause problems for organizations. So what they've done is now built those in to be utilized as well.
Okay, awesome. So who are the types of professionals that should be taking the RMF training course or just educating themselves on RMF in general?
Well, actually, it levels from the viewpoint of the organization, it goes from the top to the bottom. And so from the senior executives running whatever organization they are, whether they be military officers or they be even senior executive activities, roles and responsibilities that these people may have, to get an understanding of what's the purpose of RMF, all the way down then, of course, to the actual people who are doing the authorizations, the authorizing officials, the AOs themselves, to the senior leadership, to the security managers, the ISSMs that DoD uses, all have an arena where they have to understand all of the parts and not just bypass some of them for the sake of timing, potentially, is what they have done in the past. That's not really here. What they're really trying to get an understanding for everybody to get is that there's risks at every level. And since there are risks at every level, we need to manage them because we can never be without risk. That's just the nature of computing, is we always have risks. And so we can't get to a no risk situation. We have to get it to a, as they like to call it, an acceptable level. And so anybody who deals with how the system runs, how the system is operated, how the system connects to other systems, all need to understand this process of risk management and where it fits in, because it affects what everybody does. What's their mission? What's their job? What's their objective? All those types of things. And, you know, of course, in our world today, the risks abound everywhere. And so we have to work through those efforts. You know, I did a recent discussion with some people and looked at some of the current literature that's out there, and they're talking that we're getting, you know, 1 million new threats of malware per week. You know, that's a new one every 4.5 seconds. You know, so that type of risk area that we're all working in needs to have people who are aware of what's happening.
That's an interesting fact. I did not know that, but it's scary to know how much.
It is, but that's the threat world we work in. And that's unfortunately what the government is facing all the time. And so NIST, as the organization that has been legally tasked with providing the guidance to federal agencies on how to deal with this. They are the ones who see this the most. So of course they're going to have a revolving effort on their framework. You know, I mean, the framework is, you know, here we are changed in December of last year, and the previous version was from 2010. You know, and just think about how much has computing changed in that 8 years.
I mean, certifications, you know, they update.
And everything that goes along with that.
So do you think that there's plans to keep RMF updated more frequently, or are we still?
Well, their goal is to update it every 18 to 24 months because our threat world and our risk world and our vulnerability world is changing so much as best as they can. But, you know, they have a whole series of documents that they do this with, the security catalog that's associated with RMF, you know, SP 853. Its new version is coming out literally any day in final public draft, you know, and a whole bunch of federal standards, FIPS 200, FIPS 199 that everybody uses. Those are on the slate to be revised as well. Those haven't been revised in 15 years. Wow. So there's a lot of effort there as they go through it. So yeah, I expect them to continuously have to keep their cycle of keeping these guidance standards and guidance documents out there for everybody to use, but also understand that, you know, the risks are system unique. And so everybody has to follow that. And so a framework like what this is gives us a basic guide to work from, understanding that, of course, that every operating environment is different. And so, you know, whether it's, you know, halfway around the world or in a building in downtown Washington or on a base somewhere in Western United States or wherever it might be, you know, doesn't matter. Everybody's risks are somewhat unique. And so they have to look at this. And the idea of the RMF is to give us a foundation to work from.
That's a very good point about risk being unique to the organization and even to the people that are within it and operating within this framework. They see things differently.
Sure. So assessors, security engineers, security operational staff, the organizational oversight people, even in compliance world, federal agencies have some of that they have to deal with. Probably not quite as much as the commercial world does with GRC and Sarbanes-Oxley, but they have some that they have to meet as well. And so there's lots of those types of people who all need to understand the basic premise behind managing your risk from a framework background.
What, from your perspective, Leighton, what is the key takeaway from the new RMF? I know that there's been a lot of changes to it. You mentioned those. But from your perspective, what do you think is the most important?
There's two. There's really two. One, privacy and security go together. Okay. And so you can't disconnect them. They have to go together, number one. Number two, in today's world, with 40% of all IT outsourced, supply chain risk management is paramount. And so we've seen that perspective. More agencies, more organizations are going to outsourcing more and more because of the cost benefits, because of the letting somebody else take care of the job scenario so our people can do what's necessary to get the job done, you know, those types of things. So we have to look at both of those as our big gigantic takeaways from RMF 2.0. The engineering and the cybersecurity framework tie-ins are there too. You know, when the Executive Order 13800 got signed a year and a half ago, all federal agencies now had to adopt the cybersecurity framework with RMF. And so the fact that this got produced with those ties already together, documented in 837 Rev 2, that's a big process that's already been 50, 60, 70% completed because it's already documented. And so then it's just a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and showing how they are linked. But the biggest thing is the privacy, security, connection, and then the supply chain risk area that has to be addressed in all areas, in all organizations.
Awesome. So last thing, is there anything that you would suggest to somebody who is either going into a role that is going to include the risk management framework, or somebody who's interested in training? How should they be approaching that task?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, do it first and foremost with an open mind, and don't be closed that your designated process is the only one that works.
Okay.
Because what we clearly see with RMF is that there's a multiple methods out there to approach how and what security an organization needs for their system. Every system has a baseline, yes, but they all, and those themselves, those baselines are adjustable. And if the one thing RMF tells us is that understand your business objectives, understand your mission points first within the organization, and then look at the risks that go with that and adjust your security accordingly. All right. That's one big area that we have to always keep in mind as people get exposed to RMF for the first time, or, you know, they're old hat and they've been doing it for 8 years, you know, or like me who did it with the other ones before that, you know, those types of things. So the idea is that it's an adjustable framework. It's not, you know, checklist-based security. You got to have the substantive security. You got to make sure that everything works, you know, not just that you got the right configurations, but that everything actually works. Okay, you got to do both sides of that. That's a second part that you have to take away from this. And I think that's part of the driver behind them, including all the security engineering components to this revision, was to make sure that everybody understood that it needs both the compliance side, the mechanisms there, as well as ensuring that it actually is functioning and you're getting what you expect out, which is, you know, that it works, which is, you know, as they say in RMF, producing the desired outcome, right? You got to make sure you got that too. You can't just make sure that it's set up right. You got to make sure you get the output right too.
And if something isn't working, you have to
fix it.
You got to keep going.
You got to go through the process and you got to be able to fix it. I mean, that's part of what they did with this, is update some of that area within RMF to allow for those fixes, to allow for those mitigation efforts, to allow for, you know, where they come into play in the life cycle of the system. And the other thing they did was tie it to the whole life cycle. You know what I mean? There's security when the system, there's security ideas and risks around when you turn something off, you know, just as much as they are when you turn it on. And so you have to look at all of those efforts and understand where all of them come into play.
I think that's a great remark. You know, we see that with every type of framework, is that it's a guideline. It's not the end all and be all. You have to take that knowledge and apply it to your organization. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Is there anything else that you would like to share about the new RMF, or?
Well, one of the things I did notice with the new RMF is it might, at least initially, take a little bit more time than what we used to do under the RMF in the past. One, because of the preparation component that's now added to it, and there's a lot of gathering of documents and assigning of roles and those types of things that was relatively informal in the past, but now it's part of step 0. And so it's defined both at the organizational and at the operational levels. And so I think that that might be something that people need to account for. A second thing is the process itself, once you start the process, is not all that time intensive. I mean, there are certainly pieces of it that could be, as people are putting things in on a new system, for example. So I would expect the implementation phase to take longer there. But when you're doing it, say, and you're doing your first review, your first ATO resubmission, for example, the second time through, I would expect the timing actually to take a little bit less. Now, the one thing I did notice, especially in their new formatting, is that the assessor roles is a little bit wider than it used to be, because they have to assess privacy as well as security as part of their criteria. So that one does take more time. All right. There are certainly privacy considerations that aren't always related to the security concept of confidentiality. There are other areas in privacy you also have to consider around integrity and some other things as well. So, you know, use of privacy information and those types of things. So there's a little bit more time involved in that step, which is step 4 of RMF. Those types of things as well as we begin to walk through these efforts. So be flexible around timing. Don't, you know, give it an automatic mechanism, especially with the way the government has instituted the assessing role as relatively independent, which is really, really good, which they need to do anyway. But the timing around how long does an assessment take is not, you know, 1 week and you're done like it used to be. We're talking potentially a couple of weeks on site. In some cases, larger systems take more time, you know, that type of thing. So it also, that has to be always kept in mind as well.
Well, that's great insight. I'm sure our listeners are definitely going to be interested in knowing that ahead of time. All right. Well, thank you again, Leighton. This has been a wealth of information, and I'll speak on behalf of everybody who views into our blog and our email marketing that they are definitely going to appreciate this insight into the new Federal Risk Management Framework 2.0.
Good.
With that, we are now offering, Phoenix TS is offering the RMF 2.0 training class. If you have any questions or interest in that, you can always reach out to me. Again, my name is Ashley Nye, and my email is ashley@phoenixts.com, or my phone number is 240-667-7507. Thank you again, Leighton. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. Bye.
Right.